Welcome to Sleep Science Galaxy. If tonight your mind still feels heavy, filled with thoughts you haven't yet been able to set down, know that there is nothing you need to solve right now. You don't have to try to focus. You don't have to understand everything. Simply be here, and let this story do the rest for you. Tonight, we will drift slowly into the ancient and wondrous world of geology, a world that moves so slowly, it asks nothing of you. Long before humans appeared, before time became hurried, the earth lived, changed its form, and transformed itself in silence. Mountains rose and then softened. Oceans opened, then closed. Stones learned how to remember. Feel the ground beneath you, old, patient, and steady. It has held fire, storms, and billions of years of stillness. And it is still here, still safe. This is a journey without urgency. Time is holding you. Let go and allow yourself to gently sink into sleep. The fragile crust of the world. There is a very gentle truth, one quiet enough to soften the human mind into stillness. The place where you are lying, breathing, listening, is in fact separated from the center of the earth by only a very thin layer. If our planet were scaled down to the size of an apple resting in your palm, then the entire world we know, mountains, oceans, cities, memories, and even our worries, would be nothing more than a fragile skin, as thin as an apple's peel, wrapped around the outside. That fragility is not frightening. On the contrary, it carries a strange and delicate beauty. For that thin crust, though slender, is where every story has ever unfolded. It is like the skin of a vast living being, recording every scratch of time, every slow and subtle shift. Geology, at its deepest level, is not the science of collapse, but the science of quiet support. When humans first understood that the earth is not a solid, unbroken mass, but a layered structure, something inside us changed as well. Beneath that thin crust lies the mantle, a vast cloak, thick, hot, slow, and patient. It does not move like water, nor does it stand still like stone in our imagination. The mantle flows, but it flows on the scale of millions of years, a pace so slow that a tired mind can safely let go, because nothing here is in a hurry. There is a famous line by the geologist James Hutton, often called the father of modern geology, who said, "We find no vestige of a beginning, no prospect of an end. We find no trace of a beginning, and no clear sight of an ending." That sentence does not describe the earth alone. It feels like a lullaby for the human soul. You do not need to know where everything began or when it will end in order to rest. Beneath the fragile crust, the mantle continuously transfers heat. Slowly and steadily. It is this persistence that gives rise to magma, not as violent fire, but as a soft current of energy, always seeking to release pressure. Magma does not want to destroy. It simply follows the laws of balance. When there is too much heat, too much compression, it looks for a path upward, the way breath seeks an opening in the chest. There, in the meeting of heat and time, granite is born. Granite does not emerge in moments of explosion. It forms slowly, very slowly, deep underground, as magma cools in darkness. Every crystal within granite is the result of absolute patience. No one rushes here. There is no pressure to become something immediately. Granite teaches us that enduring beauty always requires time, a great deal of time. When you place your hand on a piece of granite, you are touching a process that lasted millions of years, and there is something deeply comforting in that. Because if the earth can wait that long to create something solid, perhaps you do not need to hurry to become a complete, version of yourself. The Earth's fragile crust is not a sign of weakness. It is proof of a refined survival strategy. Thin enough to remain flexible, thick enough to protect. It is this crust that allows tectonic plates to slide past one another, to collide gently, or to slowly drift apart. These movements are not loud. They do not resemble the disasters imagined by the human mind. Most of the time, they unfold in complete silence. There are places on Earth where the crust is thinner than elsewhere. Beneath the ocean floor, it is only a few kilometers thick, so thin you might imagine yourself standing on a sheet of paper laid atop a massive sphere of fire. And yet, the miracle is this: you are still safe. Because safety does not come from thickness, but from balance. Geology offers us a gentle lesson about anxiety. The world does not need to be unchanging in order to be stable. It only needs to operate according to deep, slow, and trustworthy laws. That thin crust may crack, may shift, but it rarely does anything abruptly. Most of the Earth's changes unfold more slowly than a human lifetime. The writer John McPhee, in Annals of the Former World, once wrote, "Geology is the science of the Earth, of its materials, its structure, and the processes that act upon it." But if we read carefully and slowly, we realize that it is also the science of acceptance. Acceptance that unseen forces are at work beneath the surface of your life, and that you do not need to control them in order to feel at ease. When we understand that beneath our feet lies a world in motion, a motion not meant to oppose us, the mind begins to relax. The mantle does not care who you are. Magma does not judge what you did today. Granite does not demand that you move faster. Everything exists in its own rhythm, and that rhythm is slow enough to forgive every human mistake. Perhaps that is why, when people contemplate the inner structure of the Earth, they often feel a very particular kind of peace. Not because everything is still, but because everything has been tended to by time. That fragile crust does not need to be thicker. It only needs to continue doing what it has done for billions of years, supporting, regulating, and quietly allowing life to exist. And in this moment, as you listen, as your breathing slows just a little, you may begin to sense it. Beneath you is rock. Beneath the rock is heat. Beneath the heat is the deep, steady breath of an ancient planet. Nothing here is threatening you. There is only movement, very slow, very steady, enough to let you trust that everything is still all right. You do not need to go any deeper. The Earth has already done that for you. Stone, diamond, and pressure. As the thought of the world's fragile crust begins to settle, as you grow accustomed to the feeling that beneath your feet lies a living structure, slow, patient, and enduring, the story can move a little deeper still. Not in a frightening direction, but in a comforting one. For the deeper we go into the Earth, the more clearly we encounter a gentle paradox. Those things that endure the greatest pressure often become the quietest of all. There is a natural transition from imagining the slow flow of the mantle to the story of stone. Not stone as we usually see it, scattered fragments by the roadside, cold blocks and walls, but stone as a living process. Granite, for example, is not born in an instant. It forms in profound darkness, where magma cools very slowly, giving each mineral crystal ample time to find its place, to bind with others in a lasting order. Granite is the result of pressure, but not hurried pressure. It is pressure stretched across time, the pressure of staying, of enduring heat, of waiting in silence for millions of years. And because of this, granite carries a very particular kind of beauty. Unshowy, not sharp, but trustworthy. People build homes, temples, and structures meant to last with granite, because within its structure already lives a quiet promise to time. If granite is the story of slow maturity, then diamond is the story of extreme transformation. Nothing about a diamond suggests fragility. It is hard, transparent, reflecting light in ways that astonish the human eye. Yet its origin is remarkably humble. It is simply carbon, the same element that forms graphite, smoke, and even your own body. The difference lies not in essence, but in conditions. Carbon becomes diamond when it is buried more than 150 kilometers beneath the Earth's surface, where pressure is so immense it defies human imagination, and temperatures are high enough to force atoms to rearrange themselves. There, carbon has no choice but to become more perfectly bonded, tighter, more ordered. Not because it wants to become beautiful, but because this is the only way it can exist. There is a line often attributed to the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, and while its precise origin is sometimes debated, its spirit resonates deeply here. What does not kill me makes me stronger. Within the earth, this sentence carries no tone of defiance, only inevitability. Pressure does not arrive to test. It arrives because the structure of the world requires it. And strength is not victory. It is adaptation. Diamonds do not appear the moment carbon is compressed. They require time, a great deal of time, to stabilize. Time here is not measured in days or years, but in millions, even billions of years. Over spans so vast that all human ideas of waiting lose their meaning, atoms learn to stand still together. And from that stillness, light can one day pass through completely. There is something deeply comforting in this story, especially for those who are tired, because it tells us that pressure is not necessarily a sign of error. Sometimes it is simply a sign that you are at a very real depth of life. And at that depth, all change requires time, not immediate effort. The American writer Annie Dillard once wrote in Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, "There is no shortage of good days. It is good lives that are hard to come by." In geology, there are no good days or bad days. There are only long periods of pressure and long periods of stability. A stone's life is not measured in moments, but in its ability to remain with its conditions. Granite and diamond, in very different ways, both testify to a quiet truth. Enduring beauty is rarely born at the surface. It requires depth. It requires the patience of time, and it requires pressure. Not pressure meant to destroy, but pressure meant to shape. Humans often fear pressure because we feel it through nerves and emotions. The earth does not. It accepts pressure as an inseparable part of its structure. Without pressure, the mantle would not flow. Without heat and compression, diamonds would not exist. And without these invisible forces, our planet would be nothing more than a disorganized, cold, silent mass of matter. The geologist and writer John McPhee once remarked with calm clarity, "The crust of the earth is thin, but it is tough. Thin, yet resilient. Fragile, yet strong enough to endure billions of years of movement." That sentence can be read as a scientific observation, or as a whisper meant for humans. You do not need to be thick-skinned to endure. You only need the right kind of support and enough time. Diamonds, when brought to the Earth's surface, rarely arrive gently. They require very particular eruptions, kimberlite pipes, to be carried upward from such terrifying depths. Yet what is remarkable is this. Most diamonds do not shatter during that violent journey. Their internal structure has already become stable enough to hold its form. Here, science does not tell a story of triumph, but of quiet preparation. A diamond does not know that one day it will reflect light in a human hand. It simply does the only thing it can do within its conditions: rearrange, bond, and remain still. Granite is no different. Before becoming the foundation of homes or temples, granite spends a long time unseen, unrecognized, untouched. It exists in darkness, enduring heat and pressure, cooling very slowly. No audience, no praise, only time. There's a passage in Meditations by Marcus Aurelius where he writes, "Nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished." Though often quoted in many contexts, its spirit aligns perfectly with geology. The earth does not rush, and because it does not rush, it completes work that no other being could possibly accomplish. When you are exhausted, when you feel compressed by expectations, by responsibilities, by your own thoughts, the story of stone can become a refuge. It does not tell you to be strong. It simply reminds you. Pressure is not always a sign of collapse. Sometimes it is just a very deep stage of formation. Pressure and time have no morality. They do not reward or punish. They simply exist. And in that indifference lies a rare kind of fairness. Anything that is patient enough, stable enough within its conditions, has a chance to become something more enduring. Deep within the earth, no one asks carbon whether it wants to become diamond or graphite. No one asks magma whether it wants to become granite or basalt. The world does not pose anxious questions. It only provides conditions and lets matter answer in its own way. Perhaps this is why people often feel a profound reassurance when they study geology. Not because everything is pleasant, but because everything has order. Even an order far beyond the comprehension of a single human life. And within that order, pressure is not an enemy. It is an invisible craftsman working very slowly, very steadily, and rarely making mistakes. If you are lying there now, listening, and feel that your life has reached a depth that is hard to breathe in, remember the diamond, not as a glittering symbol, but as a quiet reminder. Depth is not failure. Sometimes it is where the most stable structures are formed. Granite does not sparkle. Diamond is not soft. Yet both are the result of staying long enough with their own pressure. And in the very slow world of geology, nothing is rushed, nothing is wasted. Everything is becoming in its own rhythm. At that depth, where pressure and time meet, there is no noise. Only a long silence, deep enough to comfort anyone who is weary. And within that silence is a whisper, very ancient, very scientific, and deeply human. You do not need to bloom right now. You only need to exist. Time will do the rest. Mountains and slow movement. As the story of stone, diamond, and pressure begins to settle, as the idea that beauty can be born in depth lingers with you like a steady breath, our gaze can slowly lift. Not to leave the earth behind, but to realize that what is formed in profound silence eventually finds its way toward the sky. And this is where mountains enter the story, not loudly, not suddenly, but through a movement so slow it is almost invisible. Humans often think of mountains as immovable beings, standing there since time immemorial, tall and decisive. But geology tells a very different, much gentler story. Mountains do not exist. They are becoming. Even in this very moment, as you listen, mountain ranges are still growing, millimeter by millimeter each year, slower than the growth of a fingernail. That slowness is not a flaw. It is their nature. There is something deeply comforting in knowing that the most majestic things on earth are in no hurry. They do not need to prove their existence. Mountains do not race against time because they are the visible expression of deep time. A kind of time so vast it dissolves the human habit of urgency. The Himalayas, for instance, are not a wonder built in the distant past and then frozen forever. They are the result of an encounter that is still unfolding. The Indian continent, drifting slowly northward for tens of millions of years, presses into the Eurasian plate. But the word collision can be misleading here. There is no violent crash, no explosion, only slow, steady, unrelenting pressure, like a hand resting gently, yet never lifting away. From this pressure, rock does not shatter. It folds, thickens, and gradually lifts itself upward. The Himalayas are still rising, growing a little taller each year, even as wind, ice, and rain tirelessly wear them down. There is a deep beauty in this truth. Growth and erosion happen at the same time without canceling each other out. They coexist, together shaping the final form of the world. The geologist John McPhee once wrote a sentence that is brief, yet heavy with meaning. Mountains are not static things. Mountains are not still. When read slowly, this sentence reveals that it is not only about landscapes. It speaks to everything we have ever believed to be finished, fixed, or too late to change. Continental drift, an idea once mocked when Alfred Wegener first proposed it, is now foundational to our understanding of the Earth. Continents do not stand still. They float atop the mantle like thick sheets of ice on a very slow ocean. There is no engine, no intention. Only heat, gravity, and differences subtle enough to create motion. This drifting does not care about human schedules. It does not measure time in centuries or millennia. It measures in geological eras. When we place our personal worries beside these movements, something within us begins to soften. Not because our problems are small or unimportant, but because we realize the world does not demand that everything be resolved immediately. There is a passage in Plato's The Republic where he writes, "Time is the moving image of eternity." In geology, this idea becomes tangible. Mountains are the moving image of eternity. They show us that change does not need to be fast in order to be meaningful. Sometimes, slowness itself is what makes a process endure. The Himalayas are high, not because they wish to touch the sky, but because two continental plates cannot pass through one another. They are forced to choose the only remaining path, upward. From that unconscious necessity, one of the most magnificent landscapes on Earth was born. This carries a gentle reassurance for anyone who feels stuck. Sometimes, not being able to move forward opens a different direction, higher, deeper, or simply different. Mountains teach us about unhurried time. They teach that you can be in the process of becoming while also being worn away, and still remain yourself. Every snowflake that falls on the Himalayas contributes to their erosion. Yet each year the uplift from below compensates, and often exceeds it. There is no victory or defeat, only dynamic balance. The English writer Robert Macfarlane, in Mountains of the Mind, once wrote, "Mountains are where earth meets sky." But if we listen closely, another layer emerges. Mountains are where deep time meets the present moment. To stand before a mountain range is to face tens of millions of years of movement all at once. Continental drift also reminds us that nothing is truly motionless, even when our lives feel stuck. beneath days that seem repetitive, there may still be shifts unfolding. Tiny, slow, almost imperceptible, yet powerful enough to reshape the future. And you do not need to feel them for them to matter. There is a particular kind of peace that comes when we allow ourselves to think in geological rhythms. Short-term anxieties, things that demand immediate answers or instant solutions, begin to lose their absolute weight. They do not disappear, but they are placed within a wider context, where everything has its own time. The philosopher Bertrand Russell once wrote, "The universe is not hostile, nor yet is it friendly. It is simply indifferent. Within that indifference lies a form of freedom. Mountains are not high to challenge you. Continents do not drift to block your way. The world does not ask you to keep pace with it. On the contrary, it allows you to slow down, because its deepest rhythm is already very slow. When you think of the Himalayas rising by mere millimeters each year, of continents drifting apart by only a few centimeters in a human lifetime, you may feel a quiet, nameless relief. Not because every problem becomes small, but because you realize that slowness is not failure. It is a valid way of existing in this world. Mountains do not worry about how tall they will become. They simply continue responding to the forces acting upon them. And in that unthinking response, they become shelters for snow, for water, for forests, and eventually, for humans. Their strength does not come from resisting change, but from accompanying change over vast stretches of time. If you are tired, if everything feels as though it is moving too fast, think of continental drift. There is no countdown clock for the deepest movements of the world. There are no deadlines, only a continuation that is slow, steady, and powerful enough to lift entire mountain ranges into the sky. And in this moment, as you breathe, as you listen, you are part of that flow as well. You are not being left behind. You are moving at a different rhythm. One more ancient, more expansive, and far more forgiving than the rhythm of anxiety. The ocean floor and the heartbeat of the earth. As the thought of mountains continues to resonate, of immense masses of rock growing millimeter by millimeter in silence, our gaze can drift downward once more. Not to leave that solidity behind, but to discover another rhythm of the planet. If mountains teach us patience that rises toward the sky, the ocean teaches us steadiness that turns inward. There, far beneath the calm surface we usually see, the earth is breathing in a stable, almost perfect rhythm. The ocean floor is one of the quietest places humans have ever known, not because there is no movement, but because every movement here is regulated by time. There is no urgency, no interruption, only a process that has continued steadily for hundreds of millions of years. The ground slowly pulling apart to create new ground. Imagine yourself drifting gently on a nighttime ocean. Beneath you, several kilometers below, the Earth's crust opens into a narrow. From that opening, molten magma rises, not explosively, not violently, but like a warm current flowing upward. When the magma meets the cold seawater, it cools rapidly, solidifies, and becomes new rock. In this way, strip by strip, stone is born, parallel, symmetrical, quietly pushing the two sides of the ocean farther apart. This process is called seafloor spreading. But setting aside the terminology, we might give it a gentler name: the planet's steady renewal. Nothing is torn apart, nothing is destroyed. There is only replacement, slow, precise, and continuous. What is remarkable is that, in this darkness, Rock does not merely form, it also remembers. As magma cools into basalt, the iron-bearing minerals within it align themselves with the direction of Earth's magnetic field at that moment. And because the planet's magnetic field is not fixed, but reverses after long intervals, the ocean floor becomes a vast journal, where each band of rock preserves an invisible instant of history. These magnetic bands lie parallel to one another, stretching out on either side of the mid-ocean ridges like time signatures in an extremely slow piece of music. Dark, then light. Normal, then reversed. Not chaos, but order, repeated with astonishing precision. When humans first recognized this pattern, they did not only understand geology more clearly, they realized that the Earth has an internal rhythm, a heartbeat. This heartbeat is unlike the human one. It does not race with anxiety, nor falter with exhaustion. It is so slow that a human lifetime witnesses only a tiny fragment of a single cycle. And precisely because of this, it offers a deep sense of safety. What moves this slowly rarely threatens. It is forgiving. When human thoughts become tangled, when the mind runs in endless loops, knowing that beneath the deep ocean, there exists a system operating in quiet perfection, can offer a gentle substitute. You do not need to understand it fully. It is enough to know that laws are at work without requiring your attention. There is a line by the physicist Richard Feynman, often quoted in scientific contexts, that resonates beautifully here. Nature uses only the longest threads to weave her patterns, so each small piece of her fabric reveals the organization of the entire tapestry. The magnetic stripes on the ocean floor are those long threads. Rock remembers the magnetic field not because it is conscious, but because the structure of the world allows it to. And it is precisely this lack of intention that creates absolute reliability. Rock does not forget. It does not distort. It records exactly what happened. In a world where human memory is so easily shaped by emotion, this carries a uniquely comforting beauty. When you think of those parallel bands of stone stretching for thousands of kilometers, you are thinking of repetition with order. Not monotonous repetition, but repetition like breathing. Inhale, exhale, the magnetic field reverses, new rock forms, the ocean widens slightly, then silence again. No part of this process is rushed. No major error needs correcting. The Earth does not panic when its magnetic field flips. It does not treat it as a disaster. It simply adjusts, very slowly, very evenly. And the rock, faithful, records everything. The planet's heartbeat does not reside in a single place. It is distributed. It lives in the regularity of mid-ocean ridges, in the near-perfect spacing of magnetic bands, in the nearly constant rate of spreading across millions of years. It is a rhythm you cannot hear with your ears, but can feel through relaxation. When humans uncovered this order in the 20th century, it answered one of Earth's greatest questions: how continents could drift. But beyond the scientific explanation, it offered something more: confirmation that the world is not random. Even its deepest, most hidden movements have structure, law, and rhythm. The writer Lewis Thomas once wrote in The Lives of a Cell, "The Earth is a self-repairing system. The ocean floor is part of that mechanism, where old crust is recycled, where new crust is created, without intervention, without supervision." There is profound comfort in this idea, especially for those whose minds feel unsettled. For if a planet can maintain its order over billions of years, perhaps you do not need to control every thought in order to be stable. There are deeper layers already working on your behalf. Imagine the magnetic bands as heartbeats on an electrocardiogram stretching across millions of years. No lifeless flat lines, no chaotic spikes, only steady rhythms, reversals, then steady rhythms again. This is the signature of a system that is alive, not collapsing. The ocean, with its ever-changing surface, conceals beneath it a remarkable stability. Waves may rise, winds may shift, storms may come and go, but the ocean floor continues to spread at its own pace. It reminds us that true calm often lies beneath the surface. When you allow yourself to think in this rhythm, thoughts begin to slow. Questions that demand immediate answers lose their urgency, not because they are unimportant, but because you realize the world does not fall apart over a moment of uncertainty. Rock does not worry about who will read its record. It does not seek recognition. It simply does what it has always done: reflect the state of the planet at the moment it formed. And in that absolute honesty, it becomes one of the most beautiful proofs of nature's deep order. Perhaps, as you lie there listening to this story, you do not need to imagine everything in detail. It is enough to know that beneath the dark oceans, a heartbeat is pulsing steadily. It has been beating long before you were born, and it will continue long after your present worries have dissolved. You do not need to synchronize yourself with this rhythm. You only need to know that it exists, that there is an order vast enough to hold the small chaos of a tired mind. And in this moment, as your breathing slows, you may feel that you are being placed exactly where you belong. Not at the center of everything, but within the steady flow of a living planet. There is nothing that needs to be solved right now. Only the Earth's very slow heartbeat beating for you, so that you can rest. Volcanoes, the breath of the planet, as the slow heartbeat of the ocean floor begins to settle into your awareness, as the idea that the Earth holds a deep, steady order brings a sense of calm, the story can move one step further, not into greater silence, but into warmth. Not the violent heat of human imagination, but an ancient warmth, like a breath held for a very long time in the chest of an old planet. Volcanoes are often told as symbols of destruction, but that is a view shaped by a very brief moment. When we look slowly enough, deeply enough, a different story emerges, a story of regulation. For if the ocean floor is where the Earth creates its heartbeat, then volcanoes are where the planet exhales. Beneath the solid surface on which we stand are vast chambers of magma, not fire, but rock in a liquid state, kept warm by energy left over from the Earth's formation. These magma chambers are not constantly restless. Most of the time, they remain still, stable, balanced between pressure, temperature, and gravity. There is no anger here, only waiting. There is something strangely comforting in knowing that even the greatest sources of energy spend most of their time in silence. Magma does not seek to erupt. It responds only when pressure has built up long enough, steadily enough. And when it moves, it is not an act of destruction, but a necessary adjustment, like a deep breath after a long period of holding still. When magma finds a path to the surface, it carries with it the story of depth, and when it cools very quickly, in sudden contact with air or water, obsidian is born. Obsidian has no crystals. It is rock, yet it looks like glass, black, glossy, and sharp. It is like a moment frozen in time, where motion is caught just before it can organize itself into familiar order. There is something meditative about obsidian. It reminds us that not all beauty requires long formation. Sometimes beauty comes from stopping at exactly the right moment. In obsidian, we see chaos and stillness combined. Magma in motion, suddenly becoming stone, preserving the memory of movement within a motionless form. But not all lava cools so quickly. In some places on Earth, lava gathers into lava lakes, glowing red mirrors slowly folding within volcanic craters. Lava lakes do not erupt violently. They exist. They move slowly, like a sleeping creature that only occasionally stirs its surface. If we look at a lava lake without the lens of danger, we begin to see a steady rhythm. Thin crusts form and break apart. Heat rises and falls. Nothing is random. Every movement follows the laws of physics, of density, of temperature. And it is this obedience that creates a beauty that feels stable, reliable. The American writer John McPhee once remarked, while writing about volcanoes, "Volcanoes are windows into the earth. They are openings into the planet's interior. And through those windows, we do not see hostility, but life being sustained. For without volcanoes, Earth would be a dead planet. The atmosphere would not be renewed, the oceans would lack new minerals, and complex life would never have emerged." Fire in this context is not an enemy. It is a quiet caretaker. Ancient eruptions built continents, enriched soils, and powered early chemical cycles. Life, in its earliest forms, learned to adapt to heat, not by resisting it, but by living alongside it. There is a rare and mesmerizing phenomenon that occurs when volcanic ash clouds become electrically charged and produce lightning. Volcanic lightning does not come from storms. It arises from friction between ash, gas, and rock within the eruption column. Flashes of light appear in the darkness of ash, not as signs of catastrophe, but as proof that even in the most chaotic moments, nature still follows clear rules. Those flashes are not random. They occur because electric charge seeks balance. And when balance is restored, light appears, brief but ordered. There is something deeply reassuring in realizing that even light born of fire and ash is the result of balance, not loss of control. When humans view volcanoes from a distance, they often see threat. When viewed from the perspective of the planet, volcanoes are simply part of a thermal regulation system. They help the Earth release excess energy, keep the mantle from overheating, and allow the crust to continue existing. Without volcanoes, the heartbeat of the ocean floor would slowly weaken. There is a line by the scientist Carl Sagan, often quoted when speaking of our origins. "We are made of star stuff." And if we extend that thought just a little, we might whisper something more. We are also made of the planet's fire. The elements in your body once passed through magma, were recycled by volcanoes, cooled into rock, and then weathered into soil. This realization carries a deep sense of connection. Fire is not outside of us. It helped create us. And because of that, it does not need to be feared. It only needs to be understood in a context that is wide enough, slow enough. Volcanoes do not erupt in anger. They do not target humans. They simply do what the system requires in order to keep functioning. And most of the time, they do so quietly, through slow-moving lava flows, stable magma chambers, through heat that is stored and released with restraint. When you begin to think of volcanoes this way, your emotions shift. The awe remains, undiminished, but fear begins to fade. In its place comes a quiet respect. You do not need to stand near a volcano to feel this. It is enough to know that beneath your feet, the earth is breathing steadily. And perhaps, in this moment, as your breathing grows slower and deeper, you may notice a gentle resonance. Your breath is shorter, faster, more fragile. Yet, it is part of a larger story, a story of energy being held, released, and renewed. Fire in the planet's story is not an ending. It is continuation. It is how the Earth cares for itself, like a living being that has learned to regulate its own inner forces over billions of years. And when you allow yourself to see fire this way, you may feel safer with the energies moving within you. Not all heat needs to be extinguished. Not all pressure needs to be suppressed. Sometimes, the most necessary thing is simply a path to exhale. Slowly, at the right moment, and in harmony with nature's deepest rhythm. Ice, water, and ancient weather fire. Once it has finished telling its story, does not disappear. It settles. It retreats deep into the earth, continuing to burn in silence, yielding the surface of the world to another rhythm of breath. As lava lakes slowly cool, as skies no longer glow with ash and volcanic lightning, the earth enters a state that is opposite, yet not contradictory. Heat withdraws, not to leave emptiness, but to make room for water and ice to take their turn. If fire is the heartbeat, then ice is the slow breath. If magma is a roar, then ice is a whisper. And it is within that whisper that the planet begins to cool itself. Water, in the form of ice, is not as still as it appears. Those immense ice masses that seem motionless are, in truth, moving. Very slowly. So slowly that the human mind often mistakes their movement for eternity. But ice knows how to travel. It moves by its own weight, by the pressure of time, by the inescapable slope of the land beneath it. High on mountain slopes, snow falls year after year, compressing older layers, turning them into dense ice. When the mass becomes great enough, the ice begins to flow. Not in a rush, not violently. It creeps downward like a deep, contemplative thought, carrying rock, sand, and the memory of mountains with it, smoothing even the hardest surfaces in its path. U-shaped valleys, cliffs polished until they reflect light, long and deep lakes like forgotten dreams. All of these are the signature of ice. There is no blade sharper than a patient glacier. It does not destroy in an instant. It shapes over tens of thousands of years. And it is precisely this patience that makes ice the planet's most silent artist. In the cold that seems lifeless, the earth is soothing itself, gently tending the wounds left by fire and collision. There were times when the planet went much further along this path of cooling, so far that ice did not remain only on mountaintops or near the poles, but covered nearly the entire surface. Oceans froze. Continents turned white. Sunlight reflected back into space, making the world even colder. A silent feedback loop lasting millions of years. In those moments, the earth resembled a frosted glass marble drifting quietly around the sun. No green forests, no blue oceans. Only white, gray, and pale blue ice stretching toward a horizon that barely existed. At first glance, this looks like the death of a planet. But if we listen more closely, we discover that life never vanished. It simply withdrew. Beneath thick ice, where pressure keeps water from freezing completely, pockets of liquid water remained. Near hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor, where warmth from the Earth's interior seeped upward without pause, life held on. Simple organisms, ancient bacteria, as patient as the ice above them. Time held no urgency for them. They did not require bright light. They needed only enough conditions to continue existing. Tiny chemical exchanges, quietly keeping the thread of life unbroken. And like all extreme states of the earth, this frozen world did not last forever. Fire, though deeply hidden, never went out. Volcanoes continued releasing gases into the atmosphere, Little by little, carbon dioxide accumulated. Heat began to be retained. When the first patches of ice melted, dark ground was exposed, absorbing sunlight instead of reflecting it. Melting accelerated. From a white world, the planet shifted into a phase of intense thaw. Water flowed, ice fractured, oceans opened. Once again, the Earth transformed itself, not through a sudden jolt, but through a slow, irreversible change of state. During these turbulent periods, not only ice changed, but even familiar rivers learned new behaviors. At certain moments, when the land shifted strongly enough, when continents rose or sank in a geological blink, water forgot its old paths. A river that had flowed in one direction for thousands of years suddenly turned back. Its course reversed, not by choice, but because gravity itself had been redrawn. Water is loyal to gravity, not to memory. When the land reshapes itself, water follows. The image of a river flowing backward may sound unnatural, yet it is proof of the world's profound flexibility. Nothing is so fixed that it cannot change. Even what we believe to be eternal, direction, flow, order, is only temporary, dependent on deeper balances quietly shifting below the surface. In these moments, the Earth is not chaotic. It is simply adjusting, like a body changing position during deep sleep, not awake, not conscious, yet entirely necessary. Ice, water, and ancient climate together create a rhythm very different from the rhythm of fire. This is the slow rhythm, the settling rhythm, the rhythm of unhurried flow. When science speaks of these eras, its voice naturally softens. There is no need for overwhelming numbers, no need for dramatic imagery. It is enough to imagine a planet that knows how to cool itself, that knows when to tighten and when to loosen its grip. A world unafraid of cold, unafraid of melting, because it has lived through both more times than any creature ever born on its surface. If we listen long enough, the stories of ice and water stop being stories of geology. They become lullabies, reminders that every state has its place, that hardness can melt, that flow can change direction without losing its essence, that life does not need brilliance to persist, and silence does not mean emptiness. In the deepest cold of the planet's history, seeds of life waited patiently. In the seemingly aimless movement of water, there remained the order of gravity and time. And as humans listen to these stories, the heartbeat naturally slows. The breath deepens. Short-term anxieties, born from the frantic pace of modern life, begin to melt like ice under the first sunlight of a new era. Nothing needs to be solved right now. Nothing needs to be fully understood. It is enough to drift with a rhythm that has existed for billions of years. The rhythm of a planet that knows how to change without losing itself. The rhythm of water, of ice, of ancient climates, where everything moves slowly enough for the mind to rest, and deeply enough to remind us that we are lying within the embrace of a world that learned how to heal itself long before we ever arrived. Stone as the diary of time. When ice has finished its work, when rivers slowly find new paths after deep movements within the earth, the planet does not rush onward. It pauses for a moment so long that humans call it stillness. Yet within that stillness, nothing is truly asleep. Water recedes, ice dissolves into a thin breath in the air, and the surfaces that were just polished smooth begin to take on another role. From here, the planet no longer tells stories of grand movement. It begins to whisper. Quiet, delicate whispers, recorded not in sound, but in stone. Stone does not speak, but stone remembers, and the memory of stone does not live in a single moment. It is layered, one layer settling upon another, like pages of a diary that are never torn away. Each layer is one very long day of the earth, a day that may last thousands of years, millions of years, even hundreds of millions of years. Within those days, life arrives and departs, seas advance and retreat, forests rise and collapse. Nothing truly disappears. It only settles, compresses, becomes still within matter, waiting for a distant moment to be read again. There were creatures that lived out their entire lives, never knowing their shapes would be preserved. They walked across soft mud along ancient shores, leaving faint footprints. They swam through warm waters of oceans that no longer exist, carrying shells, bones, or only fragile cells. When they died, their bodies decayed, but not absolutely. Mud covered them. Sand accumulated. Pressure increased. Time did the rest. What was once soft became hard. What once lived became an impression. In stone, the forms of the past are preserved not as sharp photographs, but as gentle memories, slightly blurred yet enduring. These traces do more than tell us what life looked like. They tell us about the world that life once belonged to. A shell speaks of the salinity of ancient seas. A leaf pressed into stone tells of climate, of light, of rains that once sustained it. Even raindrops falling onto soft mud and later turned to stone become whispers from an ancient sky. In these stone diaries, there are no words, but there is rhythm. The rhythm of weather, of seasons, of slow cycles that life had to adapt to in order to endure. Some stories are written in even subtler ways. A tree falls and is buried beneath volcanic ash or river sediments. Water-carrying minerals seeps into every fiber of the wood. Each molecule of cellulose, each tiny structure that once carried sap, each growth ring that recorded the tree's age, is slowly replaced, not through a violent transformation, but through patient exchange. Wood yields to mineral. The form remains, but the substance changes. What was once warm, soft, and alive becomes cold, hard, and enduring. Yet it does not lose its story. On the contrary, it holds that story far longer than it ever could while alive. To touch a piece of petrified wood is to touch time in a very particular way. You are no longer touching life, but you are not touching mere stone either. You are touching a moment of transformation where the boundary between biology and geology dissolves, where the earth whispers that nothing needs to disappear for the world to continue. Things only need to change shape, change role, change state. Life is not erased. It is rewritten in a slower, more enduring language. Some forests never became stone. They fell into quiet wetlands, where the lack of oxygen slowed decay. Leaves dropped, trunks piled up. Time covered them with ever-thickening layers of sediment. Pressure increased. Temperature rose. What was once plant tissue became dense, carbon-rich material. Sunlight that trees had absorbed long ago was captured, compressed, locked into a new structure. Over millions of years, the forest became another kind of memory, no longer a form, but still holding the energy of its green past. Likewise, tiny organisms drifting through ancient oceans, beings that never received names in human language, sank to the sea floor when they died. They mixed with mud, minerals, fine sediment. Under the weight of water and time, they transformed. No longer cells, no longer bodies, but new molecular chains holding ancient energy from sunlight and sea. In deep darkness, they waited, not to be remembered, but to continue their journey in another form. These memories do not lie dormant in a sealed corner of the planet. They interact with the present. They warm, power, and move the modern world in complex and often contradictory ways. Yet even when released from the stone that held them, they carry traces of their origin. They remind us that what is used today was not newly born, but condensed from cycles of life, death, and transformation so vast the human mind can scarcely grasp them fully. And when all great structures are eventually broken down, when mountains are worn away, when rock is ground into fragments by water, wind, and ice, the planet continues writing its diary in smaller characters. Tiny grains carried by rivers, rolled by waves, blown across deserts by wind. Each grain is a fragment of something once immense: a mountain, a cliff, a mineral vein deep within the earth. They collide, wear down, grow round, until no sharp edge remains to remind them they once belonged to a single whole. Yet their smallness does not diminish their story. On the contrary, a handful of fine material can contain the history of an entire continent. Under a microscope, the shape, color, and composition of each grain tells where it was born and the path it traveled. Some grains were dragged by ice through valleys. Some rolled for thousands of kilometers along the ocean floor. Some were carried by wind across many climates before coming to rest. They do not know they are recording anything, yet they do so faithfully and silently. The Earth's diary has no final page. It is not written to end, but to continue. Each new layer does not erase the old, but keeps it. Like memory in the mind, not always present, but always accessible. When humans dig downward, slicing through these layers, they are not destroying. They are reading. Reading slowly, reading incompletely, but reading enough to understand that the world does not operate on the logic of loss and possession, but on the logic of transformation. Nothing truly disappears. No creature is completely erased from the story. No forest, ocean, or sky is forgotten. Everything only changes form, changes speed, changes the way it exists. Life becomes stone. Stone becomes dust. Dust becomes soil. Soil nourishes new life. This cycle carries no emotion, yet it carries deep comfort. It tells us there is no need to fear endings, because an ending, in the language of the planet, is only a very long comma. As we listen to these stories with slow breathing, the human mind begins to adjust how it understands time. Short-term worries, losses that feel absolute, are gently placed into a wider context. If everything is only changing form, then even dissolution is part of the journey. Even silence holds the potential for another story being written. And in that moment, when we imagine the stone diaries lying deep beneath our feet, written by pressure, by heat, by the infinite patience of time, the heartbeat naturally slows. There is no need to rush, no need to hold tightly. For this world has learned how to remember everything in ways far more enduring than human memory ever could. We only need to exist, to drift within that flow of transformation, and to allow ourselves, in our own quiet way, to become a small line of writing in the Earth's diary that never closes. Ancient life and the atmosphere. When the stone-written diaries had closed a very long chapter, when the memories of forests, seas, and mountains were compressed deep into matter and settled into a silent foundation, the Earth did not stop at remembering. It shifted to another way of telling its story, more subtle, more fragile, and far deeper. No longer through large forms preserved in rock, but through small changes unfolding in water and air. Changes so slow that no one could ever witness them in full, yet powerful enough to rewrite the entire destiny of the planet. At that time, The sky was not blue, as we know it today. The oceans did not carry the gentle blue tones that softly reflect light. The world wore unfamiliar, muted colors, sometimes reddish, sometimes tinged with purple, as if the planet itself were experimenting with the first palettes of existence. There were no rustling forests, no birdsong, no footsteps, only water, stone, the faint light of a young sun, and life in its simplest form, quietly clinging to every small chance to continue. In shallow waters, where a light was weak enough not to cause harm, yet strong enough to trigger fragile chemical reactions, communities of microorganisms began doing something that seemed remarkably modest. They did not move quickly. They did not hunt. They did not compete in ways familiar to later life. They simply existed, thin layers at a time, tiny living films binding mud and minerals around them, slowly building low structures that grew with each cycle of light and darkness. None of them knew they were changing the world. They were doing the only thing they could do: survive. These structures did not grow over years or generations, but over thousands and millions of years. Each thin layer was the result of countless cycles of life, death, and renewal among these minute organisms. They trapped sediment particles, fixed them in place, then continued to grow atop the foundation left by previous generations. Over time, these forms became the first biological landmarks, the clearest signs that life was not only present, but beginning to leave a physical imprint on the planet. During this quiet process, something unusual began to happen. Sunlight, when it touched these simple organisms, was no longer merely a passive source of energy. It was used, separated, transformed. Water was split apart. Small reactions released a gas that had previously existed only in trace amounts in the planet's atmosphere. At first, it went nowhere. It immediately reacted with metals dissolved in the oceans, staining the seafloor with rust-like hues. The world absorbed it like a sponge, leaving no obvious trace in the sky. But time, as always, sided with patience. When underwater reactions had been saturated, when minerals could no longer retain everything that was released, the atmosphere began to change. Very slowly, almost imperceptibly if observed in any single moment. Yet on the planet's timescale, it was a profound turning point. The air gradually accumulated a new component, light, invisible, but capable of altering how life interacted with the world around it. For many forms of life at that time, this change was anything but redemptive. The new gas was a toxin. It disrupted familiar chemical reactions, collapsing biological systems that had remained stable for hundreds of millions of years. Creatures that once dominated the oceans were forced to retreat, disappear, or seek out safe niches where the change had not yet reached. Life, for the first time, faced a global crisis not caused by asteroids or volcanoes, but by the activity of life itself. Yet the planet did not judge right or wrong. It simply allowed what could adapt to continue, and let what could not dissolve into history. While some forms declined, others began to experiment with entirely new possibilities. The gas that had once been poison gradually became a source of strength. It enabled reactions that released far more energy, opening biological pathways that had never existed before. From this point on, life was no longer confined to narrow zones or fragile conditions. It began to dream of complexity before the sky turned blue, before the oceans took on their familiar hues. There may have been a time when seawater reflected light in very different ways. Organisms using alternative pigments, harvesting wavelengths of light that are no longer common today. colored the oceans in strange tones, not because the world sought beauty, but because chemistry and light had temporarily met in a different configuration. In the dim twilight of the ancient sun, the water's surface may have shimmered with purples, deep reds, or coppery browns, like an experimental canvas as life searched for the most effective way to endure. Those colors, too, eventually faded, not because they were wrong, but because the surrounding environment continued to change. As the new atmospheric component grew denser, as light reaching the water was filtered differently, new biological strategies gained the advantage. The familiar colors of the modern world are not aesthetic choices, but the result of countless trials and errors, of silent competitions spanning hundreds of millions of years. Every shade is a trace of adaptation, a temporary answer to the question of how to keep living. From the present, it is easy to forget that the air we breathe was once unimaginable. That air was not a ready-made gift, but a byproduct of organisms that never intended to create a breathable world. They did not know the future. They did not aim for complexity. They simply repeated simple reactions, day after day, with a patience only the smallest forms of life can sustain. And it was precisely that purposeless repetition that altered the planet's entire trajectory. In this story, there are no heroes in the familiar sense, no moment of victory, only continuation, a chain of small changes accumulating into a major turning point. A humble truth written very early on, that the world is not shaped by grand actions, but by actions repeated until they seem meaningless. That the power of life lies not in will, but in the ability to persist long enough for consequences to emerge. When this is felt, the natural emotion that arises is not pride, but humility. Humanity, with all its cognition and technology, has appeared only for a brief moment within this vast sequence of transformations. The air we breathe is the result of organisms that never had names, were never celebrated, and never knew their existence would open the way for forests, animals, and consciousness. They lived, exchanged energy, and vanished, leaving behind a fundamentally different planet. If gratitude arises, it need not be directed toward any individual or force. It is directed toward the process itself, toward the truth that this world was built not through dramatic leaps, but through slow, continuous, irreversible changes. That every breath today is the result of billions of years of experimentation, failure, and adaptation. That life once stood face to face with its own creation and nearly did not survive, yet continued along new paths. When this story is allowed to settle, the breath settles with it. There's no longer a need to rush to prove anything. No pressure to become important. For within this vast picture, meaning lies not in standing out, but in participating, in enduring long enough, in interacting sincerely with the surrounding environment, and in allowing consequences, however small, to find their own paths through time. Blue skies, blue oceans, clean air, these are not beginnings, but outcomes. They are the results of oceans that once bore unfamiliar colors, of organisms that lived in conditions we could not endure, of cycles so long that imagination must surrender. Recognizing this, the world becomes wider, deeper, and gentler. And within that gentleness, we can rest, knowing that we are breathing because of a very long story, written by the humblest, most resilient, and most patient life the planet has ever known. Cosmic impacts and rebirth. When the sky had finally grown clearer, when the air carried the invisible gift of life across the planet, Earth seemed to enter a phase of stability. The oceans breathed in long rhythms, continents drifted slowly, and living beings began to diversify in form and in the ways they existed. Everything appeared to have found its cadence. Yet this planet was never a closed system. It was shaped not only by what emerged from within, but also by what arrived from far beyond. Beyond the familiar boundary of blue skies. Above, where humans often perceive the stillness of the stars, another movement has always existed. Ancient, cold, and quietly passing through space, like whispered messages from the universe. Space is not empty. It carries remnants from the time the solar system was newly formed, wandering rocks, fragments of metal, the debris of collisions that occurred before Earth had even cooled. They have no intention, no destination, obeying only gravity and orbit. Over millions of years, most of them pass harmlessly by, burning brightly in the atmosphere before dissolving into fleeting streaks of light. But occasionally, very rarely, one is large enough, fast enough, and precisely aligned not to disintegrate, but to reach the surface of a living planet. That moment, measured on a cosmic timescale, is a blink. But for Earth, it is a deep knock upon memory. Not the dramatic explosion humans often imagine, but a transfer of energy beyond any familiar comparison. Rock vaporizes. Shockwaves ripple across continents. The sky darkens, not for an afternoon, but for years. Sunlight is filtered by dust and gas. Global temperatures shift, and fragile food chains begin to falter. Not all life disappears, but nothing remains unchanged. In such moments, the planet does not suffer in an emotional sense. It does not panic. It responds as an honest physical system. Energy arrives, matter redistributes, old balances collapse, and a new state begins to take shape. Creatures unable to adapt fall out of the flow. Other forms of life, smaller, more flexible, quietly endure through the prolonged darkness. Beneath the ground, in deep waters, in the hidden corners of ecosystems, life does not vanish. It contracts. It waits. From the present perspective, humans often label these periods with heavy words, but when listened to with a slower breath, the story carries a different tone. Not absolute endings, but profound interruptions. Deep pauses where familiar evolutionary paths are blocked, forcing life to explore others. The organisms that once dominated, perfectly adapted to the old world, become the most vulnerable when conditions change. Meanwhile, the small and unremarkable become the seeds of a new era. In the fine dust settling into oceans, in the ash blanketing the land, new chemical processes begin. Shifts in energy drive shifts in evolution. Ecological gaps appear, not as losses, but as open spaces. And life, guided by its deepest instinct, always seeks to fill those spaces, not hastily, not with intention, but through countless small experiments, repeated over time. Some rare elements, once buried deep within Earth when the planet was young, are returned to the surface by these impacts. Some organic compounds, delivered from space, enrich the chemical alphabet of a life. Events that seem purely destructive, when seen within a larger frame, become points of convergence, where the material of the universe and the material of Earth merge, continuing an exchange that began before this planet had oceans or an atmosphere. After every great upheaval, the world does not return to what it was. It moves forward, but in a different direction. New forests rise that do not resemble the forests lost. New organisms appear with different structures, behaviors, and ways of interacting. Diversity is not erased, it is rewritten. And in that rewriting, possibilities once hidden are allowed to emerge. Evolutionary paths that were once side branches become the main axis of the story. Observed long enough, the periods that seemed darkest reveal themselves as the times of deepest restructuring. When light returns, when skies clear, when climates slowly stabilize, the planet does not merely recover, it becomes different. Resilience increases. Complexity is tested and refined. Life learns that no state is permanently safe, yet no disruption is an absolute end. In this story, the universe is not an enemy. It does not target Earth. It simply continues to move according to its laws. And Earth, in its physical humility, receives these impacts as part of its maturation, like a vast organism learning to exist within an environment it can never fully control. Not resisting, not surrendering, only adapting. Placed within this flow, emotion gradually shifts away from fear. Words like destruction, annihilation, collapse begin to lose their sharpness. In their place emerges a sense of transformation, an understanding that great change does not always wear the face of catastrophe, but can be a deep reordering, opening possibilities the old world could not sustain. That sometimes, for a new story to be written, there must be a pause long enough for the old ink to dry. For humans, this idea carries a quiet comfort. For if the planet has endured upheavals beyond imagination, if life has stood repeatedly at the fragile edge between existence and disappearance and still continued, then the changes and fractures of personal life may also be viewed differently. Not every loss is a failure. Not every ending negates the value of what once existed. In the slow breath of the cosmic story, humanity is only a brief moment. Yet that moment is not separate from the greater flow. The atoms in our bodies were once part of dead stars, of wandering rocks, of collisions that reshaped the planet. Our present existence is the result of countless rebirths, not only of life, but of matter itself. Recognizing this, the sense of isolation softens, giving way to a deeper, wider connection. And when this story is allowed to settle, images of falling fire and violent craters fade. What remains is a steady rhythm, where transformation and continuation are two sides of the same process. Earth keeps turning, space keeps moving. Life, in one form or another, continues to find ways to endure, not to conquer the universe, but to keep telling, together with it, a story that has never stopped. Humans within the geological flow. When the great upheavals of the cosmos had settled, when dust from distant impacts had fallen back to the ground and merged into sediment, Earth no longer carried the violence of sudden change. It returned to its long, steady breath. Mountains continued to erode. Oceans continued to open and close. Life continued to spread, to experiment, to adapt, and then to quietly stabilize within structures of growing intricacy. And at a very late moment in this diary spanning billions of years, a new form of life began to recognize itself. Not through strength, not through domination, but through the ability to ask questions. For the first time, the planet held a being conscious enough to look back at the flow that had carried it here. Humans did not appear like thunder, but like a gentle breath. There was no clear marker on the geological timescale announcing their arrival. Only small, scattered populations learning to use stone, fire, and then language. In Earth's view, this emergence was no different from the appearance of a new bird or new grass. But within the awareness of this species itself, it carried a different meaning. For the first time, the planet's matter began to ask what it was. Placed upon the long timeline of geology, human existence is so thin it is almost invisible. All recorded history, all memory, war, love, discovery, and suffering occupies a span thinner than a fragile sedimentary layer. Earth had formed, cooled, frozen, melted, drawn its first breaths of oxygen, endured cosmic impacts, and been reborn many times before humans appeared. And even if humans were to vanish one day, the planet would continue on, carrying traces of that presence as it carries countless others before it. Recognizing this is not meant to diminish human value, but to place it in its proper context. Humans do not stand outside the story. Humans do not stand at its center. Humans are within it, woven from the same material, the same history, the same flow. Every atom in the body was once part of rock, of water, of ancient air. Every breath carries gases created by organisms that never knew consciousness. Every step on the ground is a direct contact with millions of years of slow transformation. There is a deep comfort in understanding that we are only a moment, because that moment is not separate. It does not fall into emptiness. It is supported by everything that came before. Humans did not arise from nothing. We are the result of a long chain of successful transformations, of experiments preserved, of failures left behind. Within the fragility of individual life lies the solidity of planetary history. Seen this way, the feeling of loneliness begins to lose its shape. Humans often feel adrift when comparing themselves to the vastness of the universe. The night sky can evoke a sense of suffocating smallness. But when the perspective shifts, when we do not stand opposite the universe, but within it, that feeling softens, no longer a being thrown into meaningless space, but a temporary convergence of matter, energy, and memory. A form the universe is experimenting with in this moment. Within the geological flow, no being exists alone. Every species, every individual, is the result of countless overlapping relationships. Soil feeds plants. Plants feed the air. Air feeds animals. Microorganisms feed the soil. Humans enter this cycle not as controllers, but as participants. Even when we forget this, even when we act as though we stand outside the system, physical reality does not change. Every action leaves a trace. Every trace returns, in one form or another. In the slow gaze of geology, personal anxieties, failure, loss, the search for meaning, are not denied, but placed within a wider space. Pain is real. Finitude is real. But they are not alone. They are part of an experience life has carried for a very long time. Emergence, change, dissolution, and the leaving behind of something for what comes next. Humans are not exceptions to this cycle. We are simply one of its most delicate expressions. There is a quiet beauty in accepting that we are not the final peak of the story, that other forms of life, other forms of consciousness, other ways of being will emerge after us. This does not make the present meaningless. It makes it more precious. For appearing anywhere along this vast flow is already rare. When humans look at rocks, fossils, and ancient sedimentary layers, they are not only studying the past, they are entering a dialogue, a way of reminding themselves that everything that happened has its place, that what we now call ordinary was once unimaginable, that the present world is the result of countless unintended physical choices, which nonetheless created conditions stable enough for consciousness to arise. That consciousness, fragile as it is, carries a rare ability, the ability to know where it belongs, not to a specific land, nation, or era, but to a story far longer than any of these. When this is felt, humans can rest within their own smallness. There is no need to carry the full meaning of the universe. No need to prove centrality. It is enough to exist sincerely within one's part, as every other form of life has done. In this state, connection is no longer an abstract idea. It becomes a physical sensation. Breath slows when we remember that this air has passed through countless forms of life before us. The heartbeat steadies when we realize this heart is made of elements that once lay deep within stars. Steps grow lighter when we understand that this ground has supported billions of years of movement before supporting us. Humans are not alone, because we have never stood alone. We stand on the shoulders of time, surrounded by matter that carries memory, breathing the air of ancient life, warmed by the energy of stars long extinguished. Even the thoughts within the mind are the result of long evolutionary processes, through which the brain learned to reflect the outer world inward. When this understanding settles, there is no longer a need to rush outward in search of meaning. Meaning does not lie in how long we exist, but in how we exist within the moment given. In listening, observing, and recognizing the relationship between ourselves and all that surrounds us. In understanding that every action, however small, is part of a flow that continues. And within this gentle understanding, humans may allow themselves to rest. Not rest as surrender, but as trust. Trust that this world has been self-adjusting for billions of years. Trust that life has crossed thresholds that once seemed impossible. Trust that being a moment does not make us meaningless, but makes us a necessary note within the planet's long symphony. When night falls, when the star-filled sky retells the ancient story of matter and time, humans can lie still and feel that invisible support. No need to grasp the future. No need to repair the past. Only to be present as a natural part of the geological flow still unfolding. A small moment, yet belonging to the entire story. The closing lullaby and letting go when the sense of connection has settled deeply. When the idea of being only a moment within the planet's long flow no longer brings unease but becomes a gentle comfort. The story no longer needs to go any further. There is nothing left to explain. No knowledge remains that must be expanded. Everything essential has already been said in its own way, and now the world can slow down just a little more. Slow enough that words no longer lead, but simply move softly alongside the breath. Notice your breathing, not to control it, but simply to recognize it. The air comes in, cool and calm, like a breeze that once passed over ancient oceans. The air goes out, warm and light, carrying away the small tensions the body has held throughout the day. Each exhale is a very natural release, like soil softening after rain, like ice melting into water and quietly flowing toward lower ground. There is no need to try to sleep. Sleep is not a destination, but a state that appears when everything else has been released. In this moment, Earth is no longer an object to observe or contemplate. It becomes a quiet foundation, a vast cradle that existed long before any questions were ever asked. Beneath you, the ground is not as hard as it seems. It is made of countless softer, more ancient layers that were once sea, forest, ash, and light. It has supported billions of beings as they passed through, paused, and dissolved, never refusing any of them. And right now, it is supporting you as well, without conditions, without demands. If any thoughts remain, let them drift by like thin clouds. There is no need to hold on, and no need to push them away. Clouds come and go. The sky is not affected. The mind is the same. It is wider than passing thoughts, large enough to allow everything to appear and disappear in its own rhythm. You do not need to follow. Just rest within that spaciousness. Imagine the earth breathing with you, not with lungs, but through very slow movements. Continents drifting gently, oceans rising and falling. Heat moving upward from deep within the planet, then dispersing, keeping the surface just warm enough for life to continue. That rhythm is never hurried. It never has been. It has unfolded for billions of years and will continue long after this night ends. When you align with that rhythm, the body naturally knows it is safe. There is nothing you need to complete before sleep. No responsibility that must be carried into dreams. Even the largest questions can be set down, at least for this moment. Earth has held answers to countless questions that were never asked. It can hold what you do not need to resolve just for tonight, or longer if necessary. Letting go does not mean losing control. It is like placing yourself into water, knowing the water will hold you. You are not falling. You are being supported. Every muscle can soften a little more. The jaw can release. The shoulders can sink. The heartbeat can slow, not because it is forced, but because there is no longer a reason to rush. In the gentle darkness of night, Earth continues doing what it has always done best. Holding warmth, holding water, holding memory, holding the small living beings resting on its surface. You do not need to keep watch. You do not need to stay alert. This world learned how to balance itself a very long time ago. If sleep comes, let it arrive like a soft wave. Quiet, unannounced. Just an easy transition from waking into dreaming. And if, for a while, you remain awake, that is completely fine as well. The night is not in a hurry. Time, in the rhythm of the planet, is always wide enough to be kind. Notice the next exhale. Slow, long, light, as if you are gently dissolving into the ground beneath you. Not disappearing, just becoming quieter. Fewer edges, less weight. You are still here, but you no longer need to tense yourself in order to exist. Earth continues to turn, very slowly, beneath the stars that once forged the matter within your body. The long story of the planet does not stop, but you do not need to follow it anymore. Tonight, you may rest within the story itself, supported by a world that has long been practiced in caring for life. Let the eyelids grow heavy. Let thoughts loosen and fade. Let sleep find you in the most natural way. You are home. You have always been home. And there is no safer place to let yourself go, to rest, and to allow awareness to drift away within the patient, silent, and enduring embrace of the earth.